Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am actually really excited about this. A whole lot of work leading into this. Uh, Hetman's a little excited too. He won't admit it.
I, I am excited because it's something that we usually don't do.
That is true. So this is not normal history fair or politics fair for us. Kinda is actually. That's a different story. That's part of the story though. Uh, the the impetus for this is kind of been brewing for me for a little bit, but like again, in Twitter discourse, male loneliness came up, and Jesus Christ, people were brutal about this entire topic. Uh, and like I had a problem with that.
How many people got involved in that thread on Twitter?
This was a number of threads from a lot of different places. What really
That's
prompted
what
this,
what I figured. Yeah.
what really prompted this is a couple of really massive YouTube accounts picked this up and did videos on this, which started people talking, and like a whole lot of discourse started generating around it, and like it wasn't great stuff. Um, so that's kind of, and I was kind of sitting there thinking like, wow, this is kind of bad. And then I'm like, wait, we're two guys talking history. We're guys. We have issues. We're qualified to talk about issues.
Yeah, the key is that we have issues here.
Uh, so like that's really where this starts to come out. And then I got into it a bit, and I started looking through the actual literature that's being put out by like psychological associations and the papers and the articles and whatnot. And and there's kind of a real problem that's being ignored, and it's I don't think okay to ignore it. Um,
It's not okay because you have people then like Andrew Tate who can fill in that void for
yes,
people.
and that's the other thing. Like we have spent a lot of time very rightly talking about women's issues, and putting them front and center because they weren't previously. Also, let me know if everyone can be heard tonight. I think everything sounds low.
Can everyone hear me, please?
I've turned you up. You should be okay.
Good.
We spent a lot of time talking about that in recent years, and we spent a lot of time talking about LGBTQ issues, especially in light of what's happening with the trans community in the United States and other places. Um, but I believe that leftism is for everyone. Honestly, it's to liberate everyone. So you can't really leave men by the wayside. And there were a couple really good thought pieces that were done previously. President Sunday and Brooks did a long talk, and I've referenced it in the past for one of our videos. Um, did a long talk about this the last time it happened, and came up in discourse. And video essayist ContraPoints did one too a while back, and it was really good. A lot of it informed how I went into this. So those are definitely things to look at too. Yeah, my back is killing me, Pippa. So I'll have to work that out. Um, but a lot of it really informed how we went into this. Uh, and that's kind of why we started looking at this. And the other thing is, when you are a person and you feel isolated or alone, whether you're man or woman, you're going to reach out in kind of like subtle ways at first, I think. So I bet you that a whole bunch of people who are feeling lonely, who are feeling lost, looked into things like social media to see if there was someone offering a hand. And they frankly didn't see it. And like social media is not a great coping mechanism, to be fair, but it is something that people are using. So I
Are
think
you talking about like, all social media like Twitter, Facebook? I find, for my and I hate to admit it because I'm not really a
you're
person.
you're much
Bro,
more center than I am, so you
yeah,
probably get a different view from social media.
yeah. I find it a place that you can get support when otherwise if you isolate your like for example Facebook, if I mention a problem I'm having, and granted I do it a lot, um you can kind of get not only moral support but also advice that you wouldn't that you wouldn't get otherwise if you don't present your problem. But doing that is essentially you have to make yourself vulnerable. And I think that there's a lot of fear to do that.
There's a lot to that, I
To
think.
actually be upfront with your emotions.
There's a lot to that, I think, because um, I'll be perfectly frank, you are much better at that than I am.
I'm better at it than a lot of people. I think
And
it's
that factors very much into a lot of the notes I wrote here too. Like that entire concept, that entire particular concept. Like you're able to go out there. I wish to God in heaven that you'd put paragraph breaks in when you did those things. Please, please, God damn it. But uh, uh, um, but you're much better at that than I than I am.
and the thing is too is it's not. I don't know exactly where it comes from because I in my paternal line, so my father and my grandfather, they are not like that at all by any means. And actually, my father really looks down. It's not that he looks down on it, but he really thinks that it's something I shouldn't do. I shouldn't express my grievances or the fact that I'm depressed. He has very older, mentality.
Yes,
And because of that, he's a person that I don't, he's had tremendous trauma in his life, and he's never really dealt with it. He's kind of internalized all of it. And I feel like people from his generation, that Cold War boomer generation, they're certainly like that. And my grandfather, I mean, even more so than my father.
but look,
So I
there's
don't
another
I don't
interesting. There's a
what
huge interesting difference though between you and me for that because my father's much the same way, but the bigger impact is huge shout out to your mother because she's not like that.
no, she's not.
Um,
My
and
mom, my mom, there's a
but like your
uh
mother takes on the role of being a mother to everyone and in a very real
she
way,
does.
and
She's
it's
very
greatly
motherly.
appreciated. But
And
the biggest difference is for all I have appreciated that I have the exact same parental environment for fatherly advice that you did for the most
yeah,
part. But I
yeah,
did not have a maternal figure,
of
which
course.
changes that direction dramatically and how that works. And that actually also factors into a lot of this. Like the thumbnail says "Men in Crisis." That's going to kind of be a bit of a running theme for us here as we go into
'Cause we're
these
doing
shows.
we're doing a series of videos, and this is just the
This is the
introduction.
first one. And
Yeah.
one of the things I have been really kicking around in my head about the entire concept of masculinity as opposed to femininity is how much the distinctions don't matter anymore. Like certain things like man is a breadwinner, goes out, works, comes home, a woman makes the home type thing. Like those things are obviously not the case. Men are capable of doing the other, and women are capable of doing the other, and you suffer no real ill effects from it. So
They, I mean, can I bring in one caveat with that? It's just something that I have noted from the dating world and also dating feminists. Um, those qualities, those traditional masculine qualities, I have noticed, at least just from what my own experience, just dating and from what I've talked, you know, from like the experiences of my friends, those are qualities that are still seen as attractive, and I've even there's
sure,
yeah.
but they're
And
not.
I'm not trying to push that because no, you're right. That distinction is certainly blurred. And you know, there are I know many couples, like for example, my friend, I won't mention him by name, but he is a first generation son of two Polish immigrant parents. That's a very patriarchal culture, but his mother um is a executive in a very big company in downtown Chicago. Um, and she makes considerably more than his father,
Right.
and that's completely fine within that relationship,
They're
even
not
though
essentialized qualities the way they were necessarily implied that they were when we were younger.
yeah,
It's a huge thing, and like it does create an identity crisis in the concept of masculinity, right?
of
Because
course,
it kind of leaves you sort of going, what does it mean? How do I define myself as a person and a man? And like
yeah.
those are very valid discussions to have, I think. Like like there are really good discussions to have around that, because if we don't come up with an answer, someone's going to try to reassert those kinds of values that are just absolutely toxic to your relationships, both platonic and romantic. And
I mean, people are already doing that. You see
and
it.
they absolutely are. There's a huge portion of the internet that focuses very extensively on things like red pill ideology, the Fresh and Fit podcast, which I guess is going through some kind of downfall lately, which could be
Yeah,
exciting. Jordan Peterson pushes a lot of quite frankly wacky manosphere nonsense after you get past the self-help nonsense. Actually, that's not fair. Jordan Peterson gives you perfectly pedestrian self-help advice, and he uses it as the horse pill to try to shove conservative nonsense down your throat. And Andrew Tate is obviously trying to sell you a package to make you a real man. So like those kinds of things really are
people
problems.
like Andrew Tate and people like him within that manosphere self-help community, to me, and you could say this about Jordan Peterson. I have my own views on him. There's some things that he says that I really that resonate, and then other things, of course, that are pretty repugnant. I mean, that's putting it very mildly, but
Most repugnant of all is his suits.
yeah, that was kind of bad. Yeah, I get what you
We're
mean.
going to kill the Batman.
Yeah, he looks a little bit like Two-Face there. But his statement about becoming a monster, an absolute monster, and then taming that monster is essentially being like that idea of masculinity to me is having some form of strength, but being gentle, being like able to control that strength and being stable. That's kind of the way I interpret that
Well, it's a question of how you
concept.
display strength, right? Because
Yeah,
you get a case where people are like, I'm going to go dominate this person, and that's how I'm going to show that I'm strong. Uh,
and
and
it's
and that's
nothing the
not
case.
really being strong. That's the kind of fear motivated thing that leads you to say, your first day in prison, go beat up the biggest guy so people leave you alone. It's not really showing that you're strong, because eventually someone's going to come along and beat your ass for that, right?
Of course,
So like,
a lot of that domineering behavior with certain very insecure men, but a lot of it, is less physical violence than it is, trying to,
emotional and mental,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, a lot of it is that. And I find it actually when a person like that finds they rarely do it to other men, they do it a lot to women. That's what I
Yes,
what
and
what I've
that's
noticed.
why listening to what women are saying is so very important, because it helps you
Yeah,
identify those behaviors and cut them off, A, in yourself, and B, it lets you cut them off in other men. But like, insofar as introductions, here's
because
kind of,
can I
go
state
for it.
one thing? Usually people who are like that, they're able to do that to women because um there's a disparity in the strength, between them, and they usually pick vulnerable women at that. But any you don't see them do that to men a lot because most men, well, not most, but many men will, you know, push back in some way, and these type of people who are domineering, they usually don't want that anyway.
Yeah. So how we're going to tackle this is, I did a lot of reading and I did some consulting with some professionals on this. So how we're going to tackle this is going to be in two parts. We're going to lay out the definition of what's going on. Um, primarily today we'll be talking about male loneliness, how it's defined, and how we build society that can reinforce that particular problem. And the second part we're going to talk about is going to be what individual steps that you can take if you are a person in this situation that you can do to start to rectify this. Because I recognize that there are two parts to this equation. There is how easy is it to do a thing based on where you're living, what your situation is. And those are systemic problems. And they should be talked about, absolutely. But that's also not necessarily a useful answer. This is not an answer that rests in ideology. This is going to be an answer that's going to rest really in empathy and how we connect with one another. So that was very much the objective I kind of took going into this. And it was very helpful, I think, when I was speaking with the individuals I was speaking with, that they helped me reframe a lot of these ideas into something that was a lot easier to understand. Because it's really easy to take a look at these communities that are forming, like incel communities and whatnot, and be really distasteful of them and hate them. But it's also really easy to miss the sight of just as much as they're causing pain, they are themselves in pain.
Oh, they're in the worst possible pain. And once you insulate within a community of people that are like that too, it seldom, at least in that regard, as a therapeutic effect.
No, absolutely not. It becomes a self-reinforcing problem.
Yeah.
So male loneliness, what this is and it has been defined as, the social American Perspective Survey, which is where this information comes from, defines this as having 6 or more close friendships. It does not define who those friendships are with or how they function, but it is, do you have 6 or more close friendships? And
that means that you're not lonely, or that you're lonely?
That you're not lonely either.
Mm-hmm.
27% of men report 6 or more close friendships. This has fallen by approximately half from 3 decades ago, so the 90s till now. It's kind of surreal to think of the 90s as 3 decades ago when we were all playing with yo-yos. But this implies that like 50-60% of men before that only had 6 or more friendships. And I'm not sure that's okay either.
To have only 6?
No, to have less than that. Like half of all men having less than that. It's not really useful. And to be clear, all of our notes from tonight are going up on the Patreon afterwards. So the patrons down in the link below, if you want to join, be much appreciated. Give us money.
Very much so.
And all those notes will be readable by patrons tonight. Hand in hand with this, and we're not necessarily going to get into the mechanics of this tonight, because that's going to require an entirely different line of research, is that romantic relationships are down too. A whole bunch of, especially younger men, are reporting that they aren't in relationships. There's a set of numbers that have gone out from the Pew study, and I included the contradicting study in our notes tonight, that seems off, that creates this very large disparity between single men and single women, that either implies that there are an awful lot of lesbians running around that we don't know about, or polyamorous relationships, or dating older men at prodigious rates, that just doesn't necessarily reach. There's a much more reasonable gap to that, but it's still an issue because your ability to make connections really starts platonically, right?
Of course.
Like that's where you're first going to be, because it's a much lower stakes interaction than a monogamous relationship, or a monogamous romantic relationship. So like your ability to do that, and I say this a lot, it's a question of I'm going to speak to that actually, Palm, that because in particularly Cathedral, I think it's worth talking to. There is a lot of a kind of a notation that people who like things is kind of what it is, and friendships really help you develop liking things. Like one of the things I hope that comes out in this show is even though me and Hetman don't necessarily see eye to eye, that you can easily tell that we've been friends for years. 2 decades, as Facebook reminded us, we've been Facebook friends for 16 years today, but 2 decades. or give or
Yeah.
take, that he's been ranting about Ukraine and Russia at me. So
It
it
actually started out as Russia, and I'm not proud of that. Not now, but I've been good since 2014. Actually,
nothing like an
actually,
invasion to set your priorities straight. And the other thing I think that has exacerbated this problem massively, two things. The first is kind of out of control. The COVID pandemic created a problem. People don't go out as much as they used to.
I think that it exacerbated that problem, but that problem existed, and I think like one thing that I've noticed, and it wasn't my own example, but I've noticed certain there's certain friends of mine, even some family members, that during the COVID pandemic, like for example, a family member of mine, he has a significant other, lives with that significant other, but he wasn't really going out, and he used to be a very social person. Like he would go to all the music venues. He was in bands, and then when the pandemic happened, like I mean, he still has friendships and friends, but like his desire to interact with people dropped a bit from that period. And I think that those who are already dealing with the problem of loneliness, that certainly exacerbates it, because you don't even go around people then. Um, for
Yeah,
me, during that period, I can tell you that it was very lonely, because I went from finishing up my graduate degree, living by myself in around friends, to basically coming back to where my parents live. And then, even though I have friends in the area that I grew up, at that time you can't even see them. So it's a horrible period, you know.
yeah. My initial pandemic experience is really like it's a very heightened time of worry for me because of my health conditions. But the thing that I noticed is I had a very vibrant and active social life because at this time I was still living in Chicago. I had a very vibrant and active social life in the neighborhood I lived in. I knew a lot of people. I had a place to hang out. And cities are really good for that in a way that suburbs aren't.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
uh,
For sure.
so like I would go to the local diner in Boys Town. It's owned by a different family now, but I knew the family really well. Uh, and like they turned around almost instantly. They gave me a job helping them get food out the door and keep their website up to date. So at a certain point, I was working and doing a thing in the middle of the pandemic and getting out every day, even if I was just walking down from my apartment across the street into the restaurant. Like that helped out immensely, not feeling isolated.
Of course.
And it was an excellent thing. And then I moved, obviously, in the middle of 2020 out here. And I'm now in a
And
suburb.
that's got to be a completely different environment, because you're not even where you're living surrounded by a fairly large city.
No, I do not have like, and I lived in Chicago for a decade. I got used to it. I got used to that proximity and
Hmm.
community that just simply doesn't exist in suburbs. Um,
No, they don't.
and this
And I
kind of gets
think,
into the systemic problem too. There are not a lot of spaces where you can simply go in suburbs, especially in rural areas too, like absolutely, and exist without having to pay money, right? Not even in cities, but in cities, there are people a lot more tolerant of it.
what really, during my high school years, and we grew up in the same suburb, but at that time there wasn't online gaming, so there were places like, do you remember in uh right off of LaGrange and near Wolf, there was it was like basically a Korean style, almost like LAN, like internet cafe, not even internet cafe, but they had like systems,
It was one of those
computers
places
set
that
up.
was back in the industrial park, right?
Yeah, right by the Ozinga
Yes.
factory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that way the fuck out by the bowling alley. Yeah.
By the bowling alley. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
on the other town. Yeah.
yeah. There were places like that that you could go to. Like now you have a whole generation of people that are basically their form of entertainment is not going out and, you know, outside playing with other kids as much as it is being glued to electronics. And I'm seeing this so much with I've dated a few women who have children, and I am so, like it makes me feel, one, really fortunate that I didn't grow up at that time, and two, it makes it very clear that technology, it has its advantages actually for a social life because you can become social, but also it can become very, very toxic because, you know, of niche groups. Whereas before you were kind of just, you know, you meet people that were similar to you, but you're not going to meet people who share, like in a small suburb like where we lived, who might share an ideology. You're not going to meet too many of them that might be extreme.
Well,
um
here's the other thing I think that makes a big difference. A lot of that stuff fell away when it came time to go outside and do things. Uh,
yeah.
like running through the woods, shooting airsoft guns at one another, or what have you. A lot of stuff falls away. In a
Oh, I
way that,
missed that. I missed that I remember when we did that.
yes, it doesn't quite manifest in the same way. Like our differences are very easy to put front and center in social media. Um, and I was kind of reminded very viscerally of that the other day, and it come just this discussion that happened in one of the Discord servers, and I think there is a certain degree to which it elevates certain people's feeling of threat. Like there are very huge advantages to technology, especially for
You need
marginalized
to get
groups.
closer to your mic, by the way,
There
just because.
are huge advantages of technology for marginalized groups and connecting with one another, but they also can reinforce one another's fears. Um,
Of course. It also, I feel like it is unhealthy when your social life is limited to, you know, the people that you know online. And I know some people that their entire circle is that they don't really have, they have maybe two friends that they actually see in person, maybe one even. There was actually someone who I considered a very, very good friend, and um, they, and I say they because this person is trans, um, they um, deteriorated over time. And now it's been a very long time. Me and my other friend were talking about visiting this person. It's been about, I think, since 2017. So you're looking at maybe almost six
that's
six
almost
years.
6 years. Yeah.
Yeah, but this person became very difficult to deal with because they were increasingly isolating themselves.
Yeah,
And
we're gonna get
that,
into that.
yeah, that affected their whole personality. And this is a person who was very gregarious, very you know, and one of the reasons why I liked to hang out with this person is, you know, uh you bring them somewhere, and like they were of course very nerdy, but they were a very social type of
They
nerd.
energize the space. Yes.
And you know, but they had issues. And instead of dealing with them in a healthy way, like this person does not have their driver's license. They don't have they've never had a job. And they completed one semester of community college.
Oh my God, you were hanging out with what a
Actually,
faultist?
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's a good one. But I'm actually wondering if this person has heard of What Up Altus, because you know, actually like their ideology is certainly way different than what Evolve is, but they know of all of these sort of cringe people. So yeah,
That's fair. I think
but
as soon as you start doing YouTube, you become a little cringe.
yeah,
I definitely feel much more cringe now than I used to.
YouTube, um, YouTube especially. I mean, it has become somewhat of a cesspool.
Except for
For
here. Subscribe to Two Guys Talking History.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
fucking
we're
delightful.
actually very healthy. If you subscribe to us, all of your problems will be cured. Anyway,
We're just frankly delightful.
yeah,
But like, so like, this has this isolation and this lack of friendship and these things. They have very deleterious effects. So I looked into the stats on self-harm and termination, which is a euphemism because you,
termination is a word for suicide.
yes, damn it, that don't say that out loud.
Oh God! All right,
Anyway, uh,
we
it,
just got
it,
too much.
we would have in the grand scheme of things, and that's not good because we did 3 episodes on genocide. Then are probably amongst our longest videos, and those would get demonetized too.
Oh
Anyway,
God!
fuck. So self-termination
Don't
is a
say it.
leading
Say
cause
terminate.
of death in the United States. I put a parenthetical in the notes, and I should have just done it all
Mhm.
as the thing. And at a rate of about 4 times, men to women. And this is kind of bad tracking at a certain point because now we got to take non-binary people into account as well. So I kind of wonder how much of that's happening. But like, there's a huge gap between how many men are committing self-harm, ending in termination, versus how many women are. So also, I'm going to throw this up here and talk about this real quick. Last year, I think it was last year, in the middle of the year, they established a 3-digit code dialing the phone for the 24-hour crisis helpline. That number in the United States is 988. I have been heavily encouraged to tell you to seek that assistance if you feel you are in jeopardy. I'm going to leave that up for a couple seconds. But
Yeah,
the other
I second what Daedalus has said because um you nothing
it's your story to tell if you want to actually tell it.
nothing that exists that you go through, at least the vast majority of it is worth taking that dramatic step, because that's a step you can't walk back from. So that's something, I think that it's very important to utilize hotlines like that. Even more important is if you do say, how we were talking about people with 6 or more friends, but say even if you have 1 or 2 very good friends, one thing that, I do have a hard time doing, and it's somewhat easier for me in my own case to express it through social media than it is even to talk to close friends. Because it's just very hard to, it's not even that you worry about judging, at least in my part. I worry about burdening them with what I am going through, or what, that's I feel like a lot of people are in that position.
So
You know,
that's
they
actually a really good point to talk about. Um, and I kind of want to roll into this topic gently. Concerning friendships and whether you feel like you're burdening someone or here's the thing. My view on friendship is very, very almost absolutist. If someone is my friend, I intend to be there for them, irrespective of what else is happening in any way I can. So I have a very
same.
difficult time when people kind of go off of they said there's a habit of weaponizing therapy speak that has come out, and it's been
Yeah.
talked about pretty extensively, especially by channels like Poppy and Xena, in regards to using it as an offensive weapon to harm others. But there are certain protective actions that people take therapy speak for that are really difficult. Like, I have a hard time with them. And one of those things is when you say that you do not have the mental space for a person right then and there. I feel like
You're
this.
That's one really great thing about you, and I notice it's not just with me, but with other friends of yours as well. Um, I can think of just a few. But generally you're there even if they're really going through something bad, or even if, yeah, I mean, you in your life, you have a lot on your plate just with your health, but you're still able to be there to listen. And
Well, thank you.
there was a time, where I have one of my good friends. He's really great. He's been sober 2 years now, and he actually works at a rehab center for at-risk youth. He got into that field after going through what he did. But this person, so he is a person where, I'm the type of person where I can kind of go to a new environment and I'll find some friends. I'll find some people that I can, say I move to a different city, I tend to be able to make friends pretty easy. My one good friend, he is a person who's has more of like a handful of friends, and he, is not a very social person. Um, and he moved to the Illinois Iowa border, Galena,
Ugh. Carry on.
to do, yeah, very beautiful area. But to basically work, he was working in audiovisual for hotels to do their conferences and things like that, and he charge actually for this company out at a big hotel there. And when he moved there, this was in, I think, 2019, he left. He was used to living with his mother and father, so he had people around him all the time. When he moved, he was suddenly by himself, and I don't think he ever had that experience before. For me, it's very easy, especially being on the spectrum, to entertain myself, to be alone. I mean, not for very long periods of time. I have to have social interaction, but like, if I'm in a new environment, I don't need someone living with me. In fact, like,
Hey, Connor.
oftentimes is I prefer to live alone because, I'm able to have that quiet that I need to sort of, decompress. And this person, that was the opposite for him. During this time, I had gone through a breakup with my ex of 9 years, and I had just gotten back from Ukraine, and there was a person that I had a little bit of a interest in that I started talking to there, but then when I was back here, there was no really potential for it to grow. And this
Wars are
was,
funny like that.
yeah, this was, this was right before the pandemic, but at this point, because I had just, even though it was a mutual breakup, I had just ended something with someone that I'd been with for 9 years. And it was not a thing where it was like, where we hated each other.
No,
So it
actually,
was very, very hard.
she's cheering us on this particular show today, I believe.
That's good.
Yeah. Anyway, carry
So,
on.
yeah. Anyway, but it was very, very difficult. Those months afterward were probably some of the darkest of my life. And this person my other friend, definitely was in his own sort of dark world, but he was coping with that by drinking. And he was calling me, and I remember him telling me I didn't want to talk to anyone at that time. I probably should have, but I didn't. And because I sometimes that's a way that I cope with things, is just, if it's something very strong like that, I isolate myself a little bit, not forever, but for a little bit. And he was asking me to at least talk to him one time a week, and I couldn't even at that point emotionally spare that. And I feel really bad, because he needed that help just as much as I did at that time. But he was also going through, his personality was sort of changing because
Right.
he was under the influence of alcohol and other substances. And he, like, two things were at play. One, as I said, he moved and was alone for the first time, and two, in a new environment, completely new environment. And two, he was given a responsibility, basically as a manager. He's more than competent enough to do, but that's a lot of stress when you're, moving to a completely new environment.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that that's an issue too. Because not everybody is going to be available to you, and people like yourself, Daedalus, I think, because you've been through a lot in your life, you're a very strong person, I think, in
It's
terms of mentally. You're able to
it concerns my therapist from time to time.
it concerned me growing up, because, and my mom even would refer to it as, you were the teenager adult. I mean, a kid who was an adult. You were, like, forced to basically become an adult very early. And even there was such a disparity between not only, like, my maturity level at that time, but our peers. Like, you were basically kind of like thrusting a third, or like 35, 34, but like thrusting a person with that mentality a little bit into a high school or into junior high.
High
Like,
school was a really interesting time for me. Now, as you can imagine, I'm
it was,
quite
but
a
you
bit
shined
older.
once ROTC happened, which we have to have an episode on ROTC just in general, about its JROTC anyway. And we can, that'll be fun.
No,
But
I could definitely see the problem, because I was an 18-year-old kid who'd walk down to the school coffee shop every morning, get a cup of black coffee, and then go do 2 hours of computer work before school started in the ROTC office. So I get the analogy.
yeah,
And it was actually
and
not really 2 hours of work. The Air Force's system was just so slow that it was 30 minutes of work that took 2 hours. So, no,
I was thinking the other day, and not to go on a tangent, but how much administrative work did the upper level officers in our JROTC program have to do? Because I was thinking, and I remember you doing so much. And, like, one thing I regret about high school is I wish I was a little bit more active in our team. I was, for 2 years, but I kind of, found a different crowd a little bit, and, like, did my own thing with music for a bit. But, like, how much were you doing, and how much did you really have to do in that role? My feeling is
there are
is that you didn't have to
com-
do a whole, like, as much as you did. You probably did
there
about
are
3 or 4 times more than what would be required of that position.
there were
And I will,
several compounding factors. The first is that I was not just doing my on the wall job. I was also a drill team commander, and
that's yeah.
the guy who coordinated the color guard every weekend, every football game night, and for all that stuff.
Oh, that is a huge responsibility.
So like I would very much wrap all of my jobs into one job and kind of kick it down the can. Mostly it was just making sure, for most of the people, it was just making sure that they got the things out that needed to get out. That the four of us at the top did a lot of work for the Air Force's accountability inspection. Um,
Mhm.
and that was
Which is basically how those programs stay afloat.
which is
Because
how they get government money. Uh,
yeah,
so like we did a lot of work for that, but that was 3 months. Uh, high impact months. So that's a long time in a high school career. Like I was exhausted. I was exhausted after the briefing. I know.
you were so crotchety, like the latter part of senior year.
At that point, so that was kind of one of those things. Like I had reached a near breaking point on a certain level because I was doing all of that. Then I was doing AP classes. Like I did Mr. Miller's seminar, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which is 2 class periods long, and it's intensive English and history work. So I had done that. And I did that almost immediately after my ROTC period. So I would like actually that day of the inspection, I walked into class. I looked at Mr. Miller, and he looked at me. He's like, "Just put your head down. It's okay." So,
That's such a wonderful person. I wish he'd watch this podcast, but he's.
well, we're eventually going to bribe him into coming on when his home is not on fire. Um,
I hope so. Yeah, it's been almost 20 years since I've seen him. Anyway,
I talk to him pretty regularly, actually.
I mean I talked to him, but not like not
Uh,
you know
we
not
have
not
we have
not.
escaped far from the notes this evening again.
Okay. Let's get back to the notes. But
The other
I mean,
thing
at
is
least so much later.
loneliness has a deleterious effect on your health too. It can contribute to heart problems, high blood pressure, high risk for dementia, and early cases of deadness.
Hmm.
So, like,
It
that's
kind of sucks. It kind of sucks being part of a species that's a social one. I wish if we were a little more like cats. It'd be one. There wouldn't be civilization, I think, or at least we're not. It would be a lot different.
what do
But
you think about cats, Avery? He doesn't like cats.
yeah, that's why dogs are our best friends, is because we're inherently social creatures, and yeah, that has a huge effect just naturally on someone's health.
So I
Um,
wanna turn back in the chat real quick. Also bring up chat if you haven't. Um,
okay.
I want to kind of turn back in the chat real quick. And Palm Dad brought this up, and Alice did too. I don't necessarily think that in this day and age, and particularly in this set of conditions that we live in, that you're necessarily going to find those friendships outside as much as you are online, for as much as Hetman bashed it earlier. There are 2 things I'm going to point out. Our methodology of how we make friends is really wrapped up in what we are doing at what stage of our life. So, when you're in school, you're making friends with the people you're going to school with. And I think that's a lot easier, honestly.
it
Um,
is, yeah.
because, like, if you're what it becomes afterwards is you're making friends with who you're working with. Um, and, like, I've had jobs that have been situated in such a way that I have time to talk with people and get to know them and become friends. And like I've carried friendships from that job on. But they're very much like, for example, when I worked in the call center, that was just not the case. It was not interactive on the back end
No,
much.
because your interactions are primarily spent with customers of that service.
Exactly. And
You
like,
have people sitting by you, but there's no time. And that's a lot of jobs now. The volume, and that's extremely isolating to have to, for one, say you move somewhere to a big city, you're a single man, just out of college, and you're not a very, maybe you don't have many friends to begin with, and then you get a job at, you know, a call center or some like, place that is inherently isolating. Um, that's a horrible situation to be in, because essentially you wake up, you go to that, and you don't even, what time do you have to really make friends? I mean, there are like, meetup groups. One thing that has astounded me actually is like so many, I thought you and I both definitely have more than 6 close friends. We're lucky to be a part of, like, to be the popular people. Anyway,
that's definitely not it. But carry on.
but I've been on like I've been meeting a lot more people lately, and like been dating a lot of people, and like well, not a lot of people actually, now just
You
one, but
slut.
yeah. Anyway, but like I'm astounded at how little close friends a lot of people that I meet like have. And it's not that they're, their own issues, but like it does kind of astound me. Like, this isn't this is a more this is a much greater problem among, I think, the coming generation, but even among ours, it exists, and I think it happens to people that move to different places. Um, Getting back on health, um,
Well,
your mental health.
actually, there
Well,
is
go ahead.
kind of something I want to get into about work environments because I think that's important.
Get to that actually. Like, I want you to get to that because
Because
I got
there
a lot.
is a drive. So, like, if you ever worked a management position, you're going to be aware of this. But there is a drive to maximize the labor that you get out of an employee for as little money as possible. Uh, so, like, you'll hear this in like retail jobs. If you got time to lean, you got time to clean, bullshit like that. Um, they set aside concepts that build morale in workplaces, like the connection that you might have with the coworkers, those things. Like, because like here's the thing. Here's kind of a thing that is worth talking about, and I want to get to this. There's a book I want us to go over eventually too. It's a short one, but it's called The Warriors, and it's by John Glenn Gray, who was an American drafted in World War II, and he was a philosopher. So he wrote extensively about how soldiers interact with one another and how this motivates them. And it's one of those things I've seen that carried out into non-war situations, that people generally tend to work for each other than anything else. Like the guy who's loyal to Cloud9, to borrow a pop culture reference, is not really a real thing. What you do is you work for one another. I stacked the shelf because if I do the thing, then it takes a little bit of load off of Bob over in aisle 6 type stuff. Like
Yeah,
we bond with one another and we connect with one another more than we do with institutions and ideas most of the time. It's a very,
100%.
very visceral thing for us. And there are elements of the way we run businesses now that we are told to run businesses to maximize those things that are not bonding for us. And it has
There's
a
also
deleterious effect, I think, on those things that people say are important, like do customers like being in a store with you? And it ups the emotional labor required to do a job. So you're
yeah.
investing more of what you don't have into the work than you would have otherwise. Because it's like it's easy to tell an environment where people like each other and get along, and it's very easy to tell whenever they don't.
What's interesting is I find that the more active the work environment is, like, for example, the thing that I'm doing now, I do have a team and I do have some of that loyalty to them. Like, um, for example, I'm sort of on the outs with this thing that I am doing. And I thought about, against my own interests, of making a resignation letter and basically saying I will, you know, because the way it is that, I work in social work. Um, Once someone leaves, or say they get let go, the other social workers for a time will get those people's clients, and that's a huge burden. So what I basically said is I will stay until you hire someone new, which is, more than the 2 weeks that you would usually put um, in order to lighten that load for some of the coworkers that I like. Um,
Yeah, and it's a pretty common
especially
thing.
especially the person who's working as acting boss right now.
But
Sure. Uh,
if you get into an environment where people make you dislike your job, then you just run out, sometimes even sooner than the 2 weeks.
I had a job um in, like, it's been 10 years now. But one, it was I did it for 6 months, And I can say that the camaraderie in that job was extremely strong, because we were working in pretty harsh conditions. Essentially, we were, it was a security guard job, but we were working at a warehouse and we went outside to check in trailers and trucks for the warehouse of a big corporation. And during that time, it's busy, but you have to get to know these guys. And I think the one thing I can say, and I'm not trying to, because this is a men's episode, but I do find it a little easier to work in an environment with men versus women. And I'm not going to get into the reasons of that, but I do find it a little bit easier in my own experience. And the job that I had before, like, this job I'm talking about, was definitely, it's mostly men.
Well, that's a security thing broadly, usually. Um, but the other thing I kind of want to talk about is we have commodified public spaces. Uh, so like it even happened when we were kids, where like there wasn't much places to go.
No,
So like for example, they opened up a movie theater in town when we were in eighth grade, high schoolish. It was around that
not eighth
time,
grade, high school. No, probably our sophomore
sophomore
year.
year, yeah. Uh, so a movie ticket then and popcorn and nuts and bolts was $15, which is a lot of money if you're a kid.
Oh yeah, especially then. Yeah.
I think it's more now. I don't know. I
Oh,
probably
it
am going
is.
to end up having to go back. Not this year. Um, not this year because I have to go to the Pacific Northwest uh, for my trip this year because my sister's having her first kid. So that'll be a thing.
Oh, congratulations!
Yes, November. I have many
I didn't
things
know
to do.
she living in Oregon or Washington State.
Washington. She's also switching careers, uh, which is, I guess, advantageous. Working in a gun shop forever can't be fun. Uh, but she's a National Guard officer, and she's been called out multiple times to help fight forest fires. So she's like, you know what? I should just make this my career. So that'll be
Did you
fun.
become a firefighter or part of?
Emergency management.
Okay, wow,
Um,
it's pretty awesome.
so that'll be fun. But yeah, it's like and Seattle is a lovely city to be from. It's cold, it's wet, it's miserable. It's like England with none of the charm of English accents. But yeah, like
Oh,
even then when we were kids, uh there wasn't much of a place that you could be for
where we
free.
grew up, yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I have to disagree with you a little bit. Where we grew up, there's a lot of parks, there's forest preserves, there's places to fish. I mean, like, there is, I mean, and I mean, that's not for everyone, but
Right.
like, that is something now living in, still in the suburbs, but like in a much more densely populated one. Um, I actually miss a lot where I grew up and
Yeah,
understand that it very much,
the town
like, when
you're
I,
in has all the bullshit of Chicago with none of the good things.
basically, yeah.
Uh
And the one good thing it does have is it is not as many carjackings. Yeah.
but so the other thing I I think every town, particularly in America, everyone is familiar with the gang of old people that get together at your local McDonald's in the morning
Yeah.
and just drink coffee till 10:30 when they stop serving coffee.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of what ends up happening is like even we did that. We would go to a Starbucks and buy a cup of whatever, sit in the chairs and nurse that cup of coffee for 4 hours while we hung out. And the baristas were much more accommodating about that than they have been for kids these days. So like those are the kinds of issues that I think are systemic. Uh, what towns need for people really is places where they congregate again. So like buses, robust public transport, community centers where they have activities and whatnot, and you can just be because you've already paid for it with your tax dollars. Those are the kinds of things that will help immensely, I think, for people in the long run.
They definitely do. The one thing I want to get to here though is do you think that there's a disparity of this loneliness from say like a well you talked about the urban environment, but say like the small towns in America, like when you get into rural Illinois town that basically has a downtown area, it might be really depressed, but like people generally know each other. Um, I'm wondering if there's maybe less loneliness in a place like that. I have tended to notice that people who come from towns like that tend to be, in my experience, nicer, a little bit more like down to earth.
Well,
But
again, there's a Chicago attitude that you have to get past here.
yeah,
Chicagoans are well known for being the least friendly people in the Midwest.
well, yeah, it's the
But like,
biggest, yeah,
it's also uh, very different, very different in relation to like Chicago isn't a city; it's a lot of little towns stacked on top of one another. So, for
yeah,
example, I lived in Boys Town and I knew the people around there and we talked to the people around there and we knew who didn't stick out. We knew just like a rural community would know who was visiting and whatnot. Uh, like that was the kind of relationship that existed. And in a rural community, there's an extra element to it. Like a lot of places, you end up with people settling for things that they don't necessarily want because everything is so far out of reach. And there is an element to Chicago where if like I'm not happy in the present place, I can go down 6 blocks and be in a new neighborhood and meet new people relatively easily.
and it's like almost like a different world then too.
Exactly. Your entire thing flips around and rearranges. Suburbs do not have that. Suburbs have all the do not talk to me energy of Chicago with all of the isolation of a space of rural communities. And I think the vast majority of
Yeah, they're the worst of the two.
I like
And especially where we grew up, um, like I my father has lived in the house that he bought, the one that I grew up in, and I don't think like there's maybe one neighbor that like he knows and talks to, you know, and people come in, they come and go, and no one really interacts. They have their own lives.
yeah, and there's a very much the illusion of community that's created by the suburbs. And here's the thing to keep in mind about the United States, especially. Our cities aren't that big. There's not that many people in them. The rural areas don't have that many people in them. Most Americans live in suburban areas.
They do, yeah,
So, like, the nature of the suburbs vastly compounds the problem.
yeah, and it creates this loneliness epidemic.
Yes.
Um,
So here is we're starting to run against my limited endurance today. Um, so I want to get to the last bullet point, and then we can wrap through this and do the rest of what we want to do. So here's kind of what the crux of this is going to be. We talked about the systemic stuff, and like that's obviously important. But what can you do if you're in this situation? And this is obviously it's a men's episode, but this advice works for basically anyone. I made sure of it. I checked. And so the important thing I think is that we have to start meeting people where they're at. We have to not demonize people for these things because most people who are feeling lonely or more importantly feeling isolated already feel like crap about the whole thing.
of course, a person who is an incel who has problems with finding a partner, someone of the opposite sex, a man who feels that way. I want to state something, and it's something that I think will resonate with a lot of men, but when you are single, especially, I think when you're around your late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, maybe early 30s, you have a lot of testosterone in you, just a ton of it. And say you don't have a lot of experience before, like you don't have, you haven't even had a girlfriend, you're resting with it there. And that is not a good feeling. And it's very easy to displace those toxic emotions and energy that come with that into harmful things, harmful ideologies. And, you know, that's something, it sucks. And I don't think a lot of the opposite sex, I don't think women can truly appreciate or know that because they don't have that problem. But it really is something that sucks. And a lot of times too, it reinforces itself because when you are in a bad state, and we'll talk more about this when we have the relationship episode, but when you are in a bad state mentally, a lot of it fueled by the fact that you can't find a partner, maybe you're going to be less likely to find one because you are unapproachable, you are angry, you are serious, you are not laid back, you are intimidating, and that is a huge problem. For example, I remember when I was around 19 or 20, I was lifting weights and I was in really, really good shape. I mean, the best shape of my life. And I was really serious about everything and angry. I mean, I was very angry that I didn't have a girlfriend, as like, as stupid as that sounds. But my luck was so terrible at that time when I was looking and wanting to find it. And then finally, when I stopped caring and I had a goal that I wanted to move to a country that should not exist and hopefully will break apart. Yeah, you can guess what the country that is right now. That made me a lot happier. And then somehow I just managed to meet a special girl that I was with for a very long time. And I did not luckily end up going to that terrible country that should break apart that we talk about. Um, but yeah, what I want to say is, you need to find a passion and try not to be so serious about everything. Actually, relax if you can. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that end. I'll talk more about that when we do talk about relationships.
Well, bad. Sorry. Uh, that's kind of what the first point I want to get to talk about, because that comes down the line and that will build off of all of this. It's like the first thing to recognize in these situations is that loneliness is an emotion. That's perfectly normal to feel, that everyone's going to feel from time to time. Isolation is not the same thing.
No.
So isolation is a thing for which you may very well need professional help to get out of.
Very much so.
Here is the caveat about this in the United States. It's expensive.
Yeah, that's the thing that sucks. Is it's not even good to get help.
However, okay, I'm gonna preface several things here. Don't pay a certain someone $50 to find you a therapist. All of you President Sunday viewers know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't do it. It's absurd. You can use the Google yourself. Second, most therapists either
inform me on this because I'm not.
I'll explain later. It's a long story.
Okay.
The other thing, most therapists might accept insurance, which can limit your options. Some won't, but those that won't typically have something called a sliding scale that they can do to accommodate patients in need. So don't be afraid to make the phone call. The talk is usually free. Second, we have resources listed previously from our episode where we talked to a therapist. She wanted me to put certain things in the description of that video. That video you can find when I put it in the chat link in 5 minutes, 5 seconds. All of those things are free for you to use. They are there for you on purpose. Please go use them. Because that was like 90% of how I got the agreement to actually do that thing in the first place.
Shout out to your therapist friend. She's very nice, actually. I know who she is.
Yeah, she's been keeping track of Hetman for close to 20 years now. Same as me. Mostly people are like, is he finally going to lose it? Is he going to go over the top?
Anyway, so we will see you next Wednesday.
We're not done yet. I'm not nearly done yet. Yes, university. That's a good point, Palm Dad. Universities typically have free health service available to students, including mental health.
And if you're not in a university yet, you can talk to the high school counselor, right?
Most of our audience doesn't skew that age, but fair enough.
Yeah.
The other thing is, relationships are going to occur, friendships, all these things are going to occur largely as of opportunity. So like Hetman is saying, I'm going to extend that more broadly. Don't be looking for it. It'll happen. You meet like-minded people while doing fun activities. So go out and do fun things. It makes you happier, really which reflects onto the people around you, and they see it, and then they want to hang out with you. The other thing we've touched on tonight that I think is important, and we talked about the disparity between me and Hetman, is be in a place, work on getting to a place where you can actualize and verbalize your needs. Isolation makes you feel like you're experiencing things alone, and that's almost never the case. On the same time, no one is entitled to connect with you. You are not entitled to anyone's time, and they are not entitled to yours. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is communication helps you build communities. And these form all the way in different times, and they don't have to be one way or the other, like you'll see certain individuals try to tell you. You don't have to know how to you have to be able to compartmentalize things like social media from time to time too. Know that you can set those things aside. And like the final thing I want to bring up is that all of these things are going to be a slow process. It's like tying your shoe, one step at a time. And if you can only do one little tiny step in a day, then that's a victory, and you should celebrate that and do the next step when you can.
100% on that, actually. And don't try to, do more than you can handle. It's not it's a marathon, not a race, as they say.
All right. So that is the end of tonight's notes. They're going up on Patreon momentarily. I want to thank everybody for coming out. Sunday is streaming something about talking to food shops who I don't know who that is. So if you want to head over there, I can't redirect you. I have to go talk to them about that later. With that, I want to wish you all a very good evening. If you liked this content because it is outside of our wheelhouse, please let us know. Leave comments, like things.
It's somewhat
run into the Discord and tell me what you think so that I can adjust.
Can I say something? It's somewhat, nice to cover these topics. So yeah, please let us know. It's it's very heavy. I know people like the Ukraine episodes, but those are something that are for me to do. Where this is actually, I feel like a bit more fulfilled to do it.
Yeah. I think these things are important, and how we can approach this in the future really depends on what feedback we get to, like how we can make this better.
Okay, everyone.
All right, that is that. I want to wish you all a good night. Go hop over to Sundays and shout hi.